October 1944, Hawaii. Takashi Yamamoto was 26 years old, but when he looked in the mirror, he saw a stranger. Broken teeth, swollen gums, the constant taste of blood in his mouth. He hadn't brushed his teeth once in the 8 months before his capture on Saipan. The Japanese army didn't carry such luxuries, only rice and bullets. His village hadn't either. When teeth rotted, they fell out. That was all. When he arrived at the American POW camp, his first shock wasn't the electric lights or the abundant food. It was a small white box. Inside was something strange with a plastic handle, white bristles, like a tiny brush, a tube of paste, and a metal razor, a rectangular bar of soap. An American soldier demonstrated. Twice a day, like this, up and down. Takashi held the brush and felt foolish. In 26 years, he'd never used such a thing. But when he brushed for the first time, the taste in his mouth changed. Instead of blood and decay, there was cleanliness, freshness, the taste of a human mouth. That night, he looked in the mirror again. There was still a stranger there. But this time he understood. The Americans weren't just calling him prisoner. They saw someone whose teeth, whose face, whose appearance had value. The small plastic brush was telling him something. You're worth caring for. And if they valued his teeth, maybe they valued him. 2 weeks later, when he looked in the mirror, the man he saw wasn't the man who'd gone to war. Maybe he was better. Maybe he was worth keeping alive. The transport ship from Saipan had taken 11 days. Takashi spent most of it below deck with 200 other Japanese prisoners, packed so tightly that sitting meant having someone's knees pressed against your back. The air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, vomit, and fear. They'd been told what to expect from American captivity. The propaganda had been clear: torture, starvation, public humiliation. Better to die with honor than live as an animal in enemy hands. Dozens of soldiers on Saipan had chosen death, jumping from cliffs, detonating grenades, charging machine gun nests with empty rifles. Takashi had tried. When the Americans surrounded his position, he'd pulled the pin on his last grenade. But his hands were shaking so badly that he'd dropped it. The grenade had rolled into a crater. He'd thrown himself flat, waiting for the blast that would end his shame. The grenade was a dud. The Americans had rushed in before he could find another way. And then he was a prisoner, which meant he was already dead to his family, his country, his emperor. The Hawaii camp sat on the windward side of Oahu, where rain came in sheets and the mountains rose green and impossibly tall. When they'd marched off the ship and through the gates, Takashi had been struck by how clean everything was. Neat gravel paths, buildings with real roofs, guard towers that looked almost decorative in the tropical sun. Processing took hours. They were stripped, deloused, photographed. Medical examinations by army doctors who worked with mechanical efficiency, checking for disease, noting injuries. Takashi stood naked with the others, trying to maintain some dignity while strangers prodded and poked. The doctor examining him was young, maybe 30, with tired eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He peered into Takashi's mouth with a small flashlight and made a sound of dismay. "Jesus Christ," the doctor muttered in English. Then louder, to a nurse. "Make a note. Severe dental decay, multiple infections. He needs to see Watanabe." Takashi didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. Disgust. He'd expected that. He was disgusting. 8 months of jungle warfare had reduced him to something barely human. After processing, they were issued clothes, not prison uniforms, but simple work clothes. Cotton shirts, canvas trousers, underwear that had been washed so many times it was soft. Real socks, shoes that actually fit. Then came the box. A young private handed one to each prisoner as they filed toward the barracks. The boxes were white cardboard, about the size of a small book. Takashi took his with both hands, uncertain what to do with it. "Hygiene kit," the private said in English, miming washing. "Clean. Understand? Clean." In the barracks, Takashi sat on his assigned bunk and opened the box carefully. Inside, packed in tissue paper, 1 toothbrush with white bristles, 1 tube labeled Colgate dental cream, 1 bar of ivory soap, 1 safety razor with 3 blades, 1 small bottle of rubbing alcohol, 1 comb. He stared at the contents like they were artifacts from another planet. Around him, Other prisoners were having similar reactions. Some laughed nervously. Others just stared. One man near the window was crying silently, the hygiene kit unopened in his lap. Sergeant Daniel Nakamura appeared in the barracks doorway. He was Japanese-American, second generation, and he'd spent the first year of the war in an internment camp before the army decided his translation skills were more valuable than his potential disloyalty. "Listen up," he said in Japanese, his accent carrying traces of California. "I know this is strange. I know you weren't expecting any of this. But here's how it works. The Geneva Convention requires that prisoners of war receive basic hygiene supplies. You're going to learn to use them." He held up a toothbrush. "This is for your teeth. Morning and night. I'll show you how." For the next hour, Sergeant Nakamura gave a lesson that would have been absurd if it wasn't so desperately needed. How to squeeze toothpaste onto a brush. How to brush in circular motions. How to spit and rinse. How to shave without cutting yourself. How to use soap properly. Takashi watched with burning shame. He was 26 years old and being taught how to clean himself like a child. Around him, battle-hardened soldiers, men who'd killed, who'd survived artillery and disease and starvation, were learning to brush their teeth. That first attempt was painful. The bristles scraped against his swollen gums. The mint taste of the toothpaste was overwhelming after months of nothing but blood and rot. He gagged, had to stop, tried again. But slowly, his mouth began to feel different. Cleaner. The constant ache in his jaw seemed to ease slightly. When he ran his tongue over his teeth, they felt smooth instead of coated. That night, after lights out, Takashi lay on his bunk and ran his tongue over his teeth again and again. The sensation was almost addictive. This is what normal people felt like. This is what human mouths were supposed to be like. Sergeant Nakamura had told them there was a dental clinic, that a Japanese-American dentist named Watanabe would see anyone with serious problems. Takashi had marked the time, Tuesday afternoon. He'd be there. The dental clinic was a converted storage building near the camp hospital. Inside, it looked like something from a dream Takashi couldn't quite remember having. White walls, bright lights, a real dental chair, equipment that gleamed with cleanliness. Dr. Roy Watanabe was in his 50s, with gray threading through his black hair and the careful movements of someone who'd spent decades working with precision tools. He'd run a practice in Los Angeles before the war. Then came Executive Order 9066, and he'd spent 1942 and 1943 in Manzanar. The Army had finally realized that POW camps needed dentists who spoke Japanese, and here he was. Takashi sat in the dental chair, gripping the armrests, waiting for pain. Dr. Watanabe examined his mouth with a small mirror and probe. His expression didn't change, but Takashi could feel the assessment. How bad was it? How disgusting? When did you last see a dentist? Watanabe asked in Japanese. Never, sir. Watanabe paused. Never. I'm from a small village. We didn't have dentists. I see. Watanabe set down his tools. Well, you have significant decay in at least 6 teeth. 3 need to be pulled. The others I can try to save with fillings. Your gums are infected, but that will improve with proper brushing. The work will take several sessions. Takashi didn't understand half the words, but he understood the tone. This man was going to fix him, going to make him human again. Will it hurt? He asked quietly. I have Novocaine. You'll feel pressure, but not pain. Watanabe prepared a syringe. Try to relax. Relaxing seemed impossible. But as Watanabe worked, talking quietly the whole time about what he was doing and why, Takashi found something unexpected. Trust. This enemy dentist was being gentler than anyone had been to him in years. The first pulled tooth came out with a crack that Takashi felt in his skull. But Watanabe had been right. No pain, just strange pressure. The second and third followed. Then came the careful work of drilling and filling. 2 hours later, Takashi walked out of the clinic with gauze packed in his mouth and instructions written in Japanese. Soft food for 2 days, continue brushing gently, return next week. He went straight to the latrine building where there was a long mirror above the sinks. For the first time in months, he looked at himself properly. The man in the mirror was still thin, still had the marks of jungle warfare on his face, scars, sun damage, the hollow-eyed look of extended stress. But his mouth looked different. Cleaner. The swelling was already going down. With the broken teeth removed, his jaw sat more naturally. He tried to smile, experimentally. It looked strange. He couldn't remember the last time he'd smiled for any reason. Another prisoner, a man named Hiroshi from the same transport, came in and stopped short when he saw Takashi examining himself. "You went to the dentist?" Hiroshi said. "Yes." "Was it, did they?" "They fixed me," Takashi said simply. "They actually fixed me." Hiroshi moved to the sink next to Takashi's and pulled out his own hygiene kit. They stood side by side, two enemy soldiers in an American POW camp, brushing their teeth with supplies their captors had given them. "My father never brushed his teeth," Hiroshi said around a mouthful of foam. "He said it was for wealthy people. For Americans, not for farmers." "Mine too." Takashi rinsed and spat. "But maybe they knew something we didn't." Over the following weeks, a routine emerged. Takashi worked in the camp gardens during the day, turning soil and planting vegetables. It was hard work, but familiar. His village had been farming people for generations. In the evenings, there were English classes, camp movies, letters from home delivered through the Red Cross. But the morning and evening brushing became almost sacred. Takashi found himself looking forward to it. The mint taste, the clean feeling, the small proof that he was still worth caring for. The mirror in the latrine became a measure of progress. Each week, his reflection looked a little more human. The hollows under his eyes filled in as regular meals did their work. His skin lost some of the gray pallor. And his mouth looked like it belonged to a person again. Dr. Watanabe called him back for follow-up appointments. The fillings were holding. The gum infection had cleared. He'd need more work eventually. But for now, Takashi's teeth were functional and relatively healthy. "You're taking care of them," Watanabe observed approvingly during the final check. "I can tell." "Yes, sir. Twice a day, just like you said." "Good." Watanabe made a note in his chart. "You know, in my practice before the war, I had patients who had every advantage: money, time, access to the best products, and they couldn't be bothered to brush regularly. But you've never missed a day." "It feels important," Takashi said. "Like if I stop, I'll go back to being." "Being what?" "Being what I was. An animal." Watanabe was quiet for a moment. "You were never an animal. You were a soldier in impossible circumstances. But I understand what you mean. Sometimes taking care of yourself is how you remember you're human." As summer turned to fall, the camp took on patterns of normalcy that would have seemed impossible those first weeks. Work crews, education programs, religious services, even entertainment. Japanese prisoners organized traditional music performances, and American guards attended. Takashi found himself in a strange position. He'd been promoted to assistant crew leader for the garden detail, which meant he worked directly with Corporal James Morrison, a farm boy from Nebraska, who was teaching him English through a combination of gestures, broken Japanese, and patient repetition. "Good work," Morrison said one afternoon, examining the neat rows of carrots Takashi's crew had planted. "Real good." "Thank you," Takashi replied in careful English. "I learned from father." "Your dad was a farmer?" "Yes. Small farm. Rice and in." Takashi mimed fishing. "Fish?" "He fished too." "Yes. Village very small. Everyone do everything." Morrison nodded. "Same in Nebraska. My dad farms, but he hunts, fixes cars, does electrical work. Small town, you do what needs doing." He paused. "You miss it? Your village?" Takashi considered the question. Did he miss home? Yes. But the home he missed might not exist anymore. The war had touched everything. "I miss before war," he said finally. "Different time." "Yeah," Morrison agreed. "Me too." They worked in companionable silence after that, two men from small villages on opposite sides of a war, finding common ground in turned soil. That evening, Takashi stood at the mirror for his usual brushing routine. His reflection had become familiar now. This was his face. These were his teeth. This was the person he was becoming. Behind him in the mirror, he saw other prisoners brushing too. Some, like him, had embraced the routine. Others still approached it with hesitation or resentment. And a few refused entirely, seeing it as capitulation to the enemy. But Takashi understood something now that he hadn't at the beginning. This wasn't about the Americans. It was about him. About choosing to be someone who took care of himself, who valued his own health. who looked in the mirror and saw a person worth maintaining. 2 weeks later, a new transport of prisoners arrived from Iwo Jima. They looked exactly as Takashi had looked 6 months earlier, filthy, injured, defeated, hollowed out by warfare, and convinced they'd be tortured. Sergeant Nakamura organized the same orientation, the same hygiene kits, the same demonstration of how to brush teeth. And this time, Takashi was asked to help. He stood in front of the new prisoners, holding up a toothbrush like Nakamura had done for him. And in Japanese, he said, "I know this seems strange. I know you think this is a trick, but it's not. They're going to treat you like humans. And this dash," he held up the brush, "this is how you remember you are one." One of the new prisoners, a boy who couldn't have been more than 18, raised a shaking hand. "What if we don't know how?" "Then I'll teach you," Takashi said. "I didn't know either. None of us did. But you can learn." That night, after helping the new arrivals through their first brushing session, Takashi stood at the mirror one more time. The man looking back at him had clean teeth, clear skin, and eyes that didn't hold quite as much fear as they used to. He wasn't the man who'd gone to war. That man had died on Saipan, in the moment when the grenade failed to detonate. This man was someone different. Someone who'd learned that the smallest acts of self-care could be revolutionary. That taking care of your teeth could be a form of resistance against dehumanization. The war would end eventually. Takashi would go home, though what home meant was unclear. But whenever he did, he'd take this with him, the knowledge that he was worth caring for, that his teeth, his face, his body deserved attention and respect. It was a small thing, a plastic brush and a tube of paste. But sometimes small things carried the weight of humanity. And sometimes the distance between animal and human was measured not in grand gestures, but in the daily choice to pick up a toothbrush and clean your teeth. Because you were worth it. Because you were still human. Because even in captivity, even in defeat, even in shame, you deserve to look in the mirror and recognize the person looking back.